I know that the title of this episode is a little misconstrued, but the week and a half worth watching doesn't have the same ring to it. There will be a brief channel update at the end of this video explaining this, as well as things going forward. Given the time frame covered, there's a whole lot to talk about, primarily from some of the major promotions, so it's best not to waste any more time. A quick reminder that I haven't seen every single match to have taken place, and the ones I do choose to talk about are all based on my personal enjoyment and nothing else. A slight spoiler warning, as I will be talking about match finishes too. After watching 163 matches spanning 17 promotions, here are a few of my favorites from the last week and a half of May. It's only fitting to wrap up May with yet another standout Gunther match. I understand if the connotations of where the match takes place could deter you from fully enjoying this, and there's timestamps in the description if that is the case. However, in a vacuum, I thought this was a damn good pro wrestling match. WWE has been trepidatious with Randy Orton's workload since returning from a long-term injury. Most of his television matches this year have felt like house show main events, and his inclusion on pay-per-view cards have been exclusively multi-man or tag matches. It makes sense to protect him in these cases, though throughout the King of the Ring tournament, he's shown that when given something to sink his teeth into, he can reach heights that we haven't seen in years. This was especially the case in his match against AJ Styles, and here in the tournament final against Der Ring General. The way the tournament unfolded foreshadowed one of the main ideas of the final. Orton suffered extensive damage to his knee in the first round, whereas Gunther has conveniently targeted this area on his side of the bracket over on Raw. A nice reward for those who did follow the earlier rounds, though Orton's heavily taped knee provides enough context if you do come into this one cold. My main takeaways from the earlier stages is just how everything has to be earned. This isn't another match where Gunther simply powers his way through the initial encounters with this thunderous offense. The first few minutes involve a Randy Orton side headlock, with Gunther genuinely struggling to figure it out. His demeanor implies he was ready to simply out-wrestle Orton, though the opposite happens and he's conveying a rare sense of frustration for him. In turn, he has no choice but to throw the first chop out of a rope break. They get so much out of a simple exchange like this, which would normally be a color by the numbers sequence of very little significance in the majority of modern TV wrestling. This chop rooted in an underhanded tactic doesn't sit well with Orton, and he attempts to go blow for blow with Gunther. While he does find some success, Gunther's expert timing gets him firmly in control, and both the bad back and knee injury come into play. Just like previous matches in his tournament, the knee isn't always the primary focus, but rather something kept in mind. It is still just as effective when he does go after it, and it would ultimately be the deciding factor. Orton is great on the receiving end of this, getting across the overwhelming exhaustion and pain he's harboring. This makes these last-ditch efforts all the more impactful, like jostling for a vertical suplex or risking the back by resorting to his signature power slam. The risk involved in going back to the well gives a palpable weight to all of his attempted comebacks. Every move comes with a price, gradually raising the stakes. Gunther goes to lengths to assure the result through predictably strong work of the back and knee, and puts the match away with his ability to adjust on the fly. Orton goes for broke with one more RKO, though Gunther breaks the pin by chopping the injured knee and rolling up his opponent to be crowned the King of the Ring. Now, there's obviously a caveat in terms of the finish, as Orton's shoulder was clearly off the mat, though it didn't ruin anything for me. I've chose to read it as a blown call, which happens all the time in sports, and it gives us an avenue for a rematch somewhere down the line. Maybe I'm reaching with that, but it didn't take away from what I personally got out of the previous 20 minutes. This match stood out to me amongst WWE's entire catalog this year, for how much the concept of pro wrestling being presented as a struggle is desired these days. Randy Orton and Gunther provided the closest thing you can find to that within the constraints of this style. Something that's changed in this process of catching up, rather than seeing as much as I can as it happens, is tempering my expectations when a match or show has buzz around it. As consistent a promotion as Deadlock has become, I didn't want to overshoot in anticipation of seeing the critically acclaimed Limit Break event that aired on the 25th. The thing is, Limit Break actually lived up to those expectations, and I think it's one of the more complete wrestling shows of 2024 up to this point. It's a breeze of a watch, and while I was one of many tuning in for a very good Roderick Strong Fuminori Abe match, the highlight for me was a stellar main event between Kevin Ku and the DPW World's Champion Calvin Tankman. After his last defense, Tankman began to embrace a much harsher side to him. A post-match beatdown of Mike Bailey did not sit well with the rest of the locker room, and it was Kevin Ku of Violence is Forever who stepped up in response, wasting no time to take the fight to the champion. If you were unfamiliar with these two, they let you know exactly what they're about from the opening bell. Ku utilizes his speed and striking proficiency to target the vertical base of the monstrous champion, though Tankman answers in a very emphatic way, lawn darting the challenger into a barricade on the outside. Between the opening exchange and the trash talking between flurries, it's clear that these two do not like each other, and they keep that energy consistent throughout. Tankman is so great in this match as an imposing force, but never fails to acknowledge the extensive work done to his leg. Ku implements some vicious tactics like guillotine maneuvers and multiple dragon screws, including one where he drives both legs into the canvas at the same time, which looked especially nasty. It is a genuine ass kicker of a match, though both men playing their role to a T ensure that there's much more to this than the bombs. It never feels one note. It's a balancing act of Ku's relentless fire, and Tankman bringing him back down to earth with his overwhelming strength. Ku's aggressive spurts push the pace of the entire match, and when he has the momentum, it is very easy to get behind him in hopes of overcoming the hulking obstacle in front of him. Unfortunately, the looming threat of heavyweight hustle comes to fruition, as one slip in the corner gives the champion a window to hit a sickening elbow strike out of midair. A driver soon after is enough for Tankman to successfully defend his championship for the 6th time. Fantastic stuff here from both wrestlers, and I thought Caprice Coleman's contributions on commentary did a great job of fleshing out each man's strategies. I wish more world title matches felt like this one, though in turn, it makes Tankman's title reign appointment viewing. I really look forward to seeing the following defense against Alex Shelley. If you haven't been keeping up with Deadlock, this show was the first going forward to be found on Wrestle Universe, which is a great addition to one of the best streaming services for the value alone. It's been a while since I've talked AEW on the channel, and that simply comes down to not being crazy about the television heading into Double or Nothing. By now it's safe to assume that the pay-per-views themselves will have something to enjoy, and this show was no different. One of my favorite matches on the card was the third singles meeting between Jon Moxley and Konosuke Takeshita, and while the convoluted nature and politics of this being an eliminator match complicated things, they've torn the house down in the past, and I was eager to see them run it back. Time goes by quickly in pro wrestling, and these are not the same wrestlers from 2022. Takeshita was a babyface on the rise, while Moxley was at the peak of his powers. Fast forward a year and a half after their last meeting, and a heel Takeshita that maximizes the more brutal aspects of his game meets a Jon Moxley at his most vulnerable after an attack on his arm the night before. Entering with a giant target, Moxley is extremely giving in this match. I can't think of a match in recent memory where he not only sold to this degree but had to fight from underneath quite like this one. Takeshita's focus on the arm is strong and works over all parts of the limb, even down to the hand and fingers. A lot of these sequences are connected through more high impact moves and hard striking, and Mox can still deliver on these as well with one good arm. While Mox is extremely protected in AEW, his entire character is rooted in the ideals of never folding against whatever is being thrown at him, and here it's nearly his undoing. That stubbornness to insist to going blow for blow gets him into trouble more than once, nearly costing him the match when a piledriver attempt is thwarted. Takeshita is dominant here, and Mox only gains ground through some instinctual reversals and by resorting to using his unraveled bandage to assist a sleeper hold. Out of desperation, Don Callis makes the call to incorporate steel chairs, and giving Moxley the time to recover ultimately blows up in their faces. A perfectly timed stomp into the chair and a Death Rider sealed the win for Moxley. This late into the match, all Takeshita had to do was stay the course, and the split decision of bending the rules cost him the match and the right to challenge. It's certainly not perfect, but I like this a whole lot. It's a stark contrast to their previous 2 matches, and a lot of Jon Moxley's pay-per-view catalog in general. Now, outside perception is not something I like to discuss on here all the time, though I did find some of the backlash towards this match a bit strange. I get the criticism towards the booking, as the interpromotional politics were basically unavoidable, and they still haven't followed up with that finish over 2 months later. However, I was a little confused hearing the major wrestling channels on this platform complaining about the execution of the match itself. These were simple ideas done well, and told a story as old as time, with the heel losing sight of the mission and having to pay for it. Maybe they wanted this to look like the other Moxley Takeshita matches, though I thought this benefited from how different it was to the previous meetings. It's totally fine if it just wasn't your thing, but I feel the hate for it seems a bit misplaced. Staying in Vegas, we get to the back half of the Double or Nothing card, featuring the in-ring debut of Mercedes Moné in All Elite Wrestling. Given that her start on TV was lackluster to say the least, I had a feeling that all would be forgiven once the bell rang. Mercedes made good on that, and her match with Willow Nightingale was befitting of the occasion. The introductions and hot crowd make this feel like a massive deal, and while that was bound to be the case for someone of Mercedes' stature, this was an overdue spotlight for Willow Nightingale's rising star. She's been ready for this for quite a while now and just needed to stick the landing. The big fight feel isn't hampered by any sort of inconsequential opening exchanges. These two go for it right from the off and keep things at a brisk pace for the entire 18 minutes. The pacing fits the dynamic between the two, and Mercedes' evasive tactics early is also to the benefit of the split crowd reaction. It's testament to these two wrestlers that they were able to maintain the heated atmosphere for the whole match, especially this late into such a long show. The leg work from Mercedes is treated as retaliatory by commentary, calling back to the injury that took her out for over a year. I interpreted this as a way to slow down Willow, who was on fire to start this match. She's a relentless powerhouse with answers for Mercedes' lucha-influenced offense, most of the time through sheer force alone. When it's her turn to go after the leg, she shows a nastier side of her repertoire between the knee breaker spot on the apron and the swinging inverted cloverleaf, which just looked insane. As the babyface in the match, I think she did a great job to deliver a mean-spirited performance while remaining so endearing. I do wish they were a little more consistent with the ideas involving the leg, but I don't think it takes away too much from the match either. It just felt like there was more to explore in that regard, and maybe that will be fleshed out more in the inevitable third match. I wouldn't blame anyone for feeling that the interference took the wind out of their sails, though I think the visual pinfall protects Willow and gives a clear reasoning for the rubber match. Mercedes taking advantage of this to hit her finisher and embracing the heel roll going forward makes another match in this series all the more intriguing. I get some of the disappointment towards Willow losing here, but in the grand scheme of things, she not only has something to chase now, but also a personal issue with Chris Statlander. For a division that has been rightly criticized for lacking programs that don't involve a championship, building one around Willow is the right call in my opinion. By the time that's all said and done, she'll be staking her claim as the face of AEW's women's division. This match was a strong statement of intent, and in my opinion, the highlight of Double or Nothing. I haven't had too much to say about this year's Best of the Super Junior tournament, though this was a match that I had circled once KUSHIDA was announced as an injury replacement. I really loved this pair's tournament match last year, and was curious as to how they'd follow up. The setting and situation is far different this time around, though I think these two did an admirable job with what they were given. Last year, DOUKI humbled KUSHIDA in his return to singles competition in Japan, and KUSHIDA handles this rematch with a much more grounded approach. He now takes DOUKI as a credible threat, and wrestles the early stages of this match with caution. As the two submission specialists riff on the mat, KUSHIDA's frustrations begin to show. It's clear he's still bitter after last year's defeat, and he leans into some more aggressive tactics in order to get his win back. He's content with going for a countout victory until the official intervenes, to which Kushida answers by going after DOUKI's arm. From this point, he puts a heavy emphasis on striking, rather than the increasingly elaborate holds from the previous meeting. The goal is still the same: soften up the arm and go for the hoverboard lock. While Kushida doesn't take his focus off of his opponent, the difference here is that DOUKI is just a better wrestler than he was a year ago, and is better equipped to navigate through the situation. Surviving the hoverboard lock and using his awareness on the outside to launch a comeback gives him a chance. A daybreak DDT leads to a decisive victory for DOUKI, submitting Kushida with the Italian stretch 32. DOUKI just seems to have Kushida's number, and I really like that they've used their few meetings to tell that story. A nice little match more than anything, though a worthy follow-up to a sentimental favorite of mine. There's some nice continuity involved, as this was a good way to gauge DOUKI's growth in the junior division. He's taken some big steps in 2024, and has been one of the feel-good stories in a turbulent year for New Japan. The post-match interviews shed some light on the admiration these two have for each other. Kushida talks about their similar beginnings, training in Mexico on their own to make it to this stage. He publicly endorses DOUKI as he heads into the late stages of the tournament. Given these sentiments towards each other, I really hope to see them interact again down the road. We close out this episode with the first defense of Yuma Anzai's Triple Crown in All Japan Pro Wrestling. The timing of his title victory was peculiar, as it took place just before the Champion Carnival began, though 2 months later, it was Kento Miyahara who emerged victorious with the right to challenge Anzai. This poses a massive threat for the super rookie, being pitted against the ace of the promotion so early. It remained to be seen if Anzai was ready to carry the mantle, as on paper, it's safe for All Japan to just put the belt on Kento at any time. Unfortunately, this is another match where if you aren't a fan of the Kento Miyahara formula, this one won't change your mind. There's one section in particular that I found the pacing incredibly frustrating, and that's coming from someone who likes a lot of his work. It looked like we were in for a hot start, as Kento takes liberties after a rope break and Anzai isn't having it. He fires back and they go outside, and stay there for 5 minutes. It wasn't entirely empty, as Anzai does show that he was prepared for a lot of what Miyahara does. It just felt way too long of a stretch this early into the match. Things pick up once they are back in the ring. Kento begins to posture and his strikes become increasingly cynical. I was hoping he would show this side of him against Anzai, acting as a nice foil for the babyface champion. As good as Yuma is at taking a beating, it was a matter of what these main events would look like when he starts to put together comebacks, and seeing that come to fruition here was awesome. It's much different from winning the title, where Anzai weathered the storm and made his one chance count. Here, he's finding the answers for what the face of the company is throwing at him in real time and succeeding. He's able to block Kento's apron pile driver and answer with a sick dragon suplex of his own, and a reversal of a lariat into a sleeper hold feels like a massive shift in momentum that elevates Anzai from this plucky underdog to feeling like the guy. The late stages do not stray too far from your modern world title match fare, though it is handled with a slightly different flavor. It's based around Yuma doing whatever he can to prevent Kento from executing his shutdown German suplex, and I think that was a cool idea to explore. It isn't one of those big match runs filled with the flashiest counters and near falls, but rather one where both competitors are pushing themselves to the brink to stay in the fight. To cement himself, Anzai hits Kento with his own finisher, before a jumping knee and gimlet proved to be the difference after an exhausting 26 minutes. I do think that this would have benefited from some trimming down, but the things I liked in this match really worked for me. Yuma's ascension has been a joy to watch, and it's refreshing seeing a company invest in their youth movement like All Japan has. On this night, Yuma Anzai's title reign is christened with a baptism by fire, and here he has never felt more like the heir apparent until defeating Kento Miyahara in Korakuen Hall. And before I go, here are some honorable mentions. Utami Hayashishita and Julia vs Sari and Bozilla from Marigold May 20th. A fun main event for the promotion's debut as Bozilla's strong first impression steals the show. Team 200 kg versus Bobu Bobu Momo Banana from Sendai Girls May 21st. The Sendai Girls tag team matches continue to hit with insane consistency, and this one is no different. Yoshinobu Kanemaru vs El Desperado from New Japan May 25th. Maybe not as great as their tournament match last year, though this pairing is always one I will go out of the way for. And last but not least, Masa Kitamiya vs Tomohiro Ishii from Noah May 22nd. Dudes rock, you know the drill when it comes to these two. And that is it from me. If you got this far into the video, thank you so much for hearing what I had to say, especially given that this is a longer one. Now that I've finally watched through May, it's time to talk about the channel going forward. I've considered returning to the monthly format due to being 2 months behind, but I feel what makes the most sense is to meet somewhere in the middle. I want to be thorough enough with the match selection in the most efficient way possible, so as of now, June is set to be covered in 2 parts. Depending on how that goes, it could be the formula for the foreseeable future. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at OuterStevan as I continue through my watch list. Thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time.